Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at what you want in life, a survey of Ecclesiastes chapters 6 through 9 in our continuing study of the poetic books of the Old Testament. We looked at Ecclesiastes as being summed up in 5 sermons. The first sermon tells Solomon's story. It tells us about how all of life is emptiness, but man ought to enjoy good because it's from God. And in telling us Solomon's story, it introduces 4 themes that we're going to see in these next 4 sermons. We looked already at the seasons of life, how there's a monotony to life, and yet there's profit in seeing God as the giver of all those seasons of life. We looked at the third sermon, enjoying the journey, and it reminds us there's an emptiness in wisdom, but instead of being fearful, we ought to enjoy life while it lasts, because it is a gift from God. Now we come to the fourth sermon. It's what I call what you want in life. It reminds us there's a futility in wealth, but man sees life as a struggle. On the other hand, God gave life to be enjoyed. It's going to be connected with that same idea we saw last time, introduced last time, enjoy the journey. So, getting what you want in life, or I guess another title would be finding fulfillment in what you have. And that's going to be Ecclesiastes chapters 6 through 9. We begin in chapter 6 verse 1. There is an evil which I've seen under the sun, and which is prevalent among men. It's a common evil. A man to whom God has given riches and wealth and honor, so that his soul lacks nothing of all that he desires. Remember that reminds you of Solomon, that was his story. Yet God has not empowered him to eat from them, for a foreigner enjoys them. And this is vanity and a severe affliction. In other words, you work all your life for your retirement, and then you die and somebody else gets that. Verse 3, if a man fathers 100 children and lives many years, however many they may be, but his soul is not satisfied with good things, and he does not even have a proper burial, then I say better the miscarriage than he, for it comes in futility and goes into obscurity, and its name is covered in obscurity. He makes a name for himself, and he has 100 children, but at the end, they're not paying attention to him. They don't really care. Better that he hadn't lived at all than to go through life and at the end of it be such an abysmal failure. Jumping down to chapter 6 verse 10, whatever exists has already been named, and it is known what man is, for he cannot dispute with him who is stronger than he is. For there are many words which increase futility. What then is the advantage to a man? For who knows what is good for a man during his lifetime, during the few years of his futile life? You know, you spend your whole life on one endeavor, and you find out at the end that was the wrong endeavor. You know, somebody said you spend all your time and energy climbing the ladder of success, only to find out it's leaning against the wrong wall. The preacher says he will spend them like a shadow, for who can tell a man what will be after him under the sun? You work all your life, and then you die, and who's to say that what you did, what you worked for, is going to last? So we come down to chapter 7, verse 1. A good name is better than a good ointment, and the day of one's death is better than the day of one's birth. Now, you think, wait a minute, how can the day of one's death be better than the day of one's birth? At your birth, you're only potential. You might do well, you might do awful. You might be a wonderful person, you might be a terrible person. By the day of one's death, you can tell what that life was going to be. Hopefully it was good, but now you can say, I can look back on it and say that it was good. Verse 8, the end of a matter is better than its beginning. Again, this is the difference between potential versus actual. And then he goes on to say, patience of spirit is better than haughtiness of spirit. Verse 10, do not say, why is it that the former days were better than these? For it is not from wisdom that you ask about this. Have you ever noticed that people always look back to the good old days? I used to tell my firefighters back in the day when I was a battalion chief, I said, you better enjoy today, because you're going to be looking at today as the good old days. And we always tend to go back and reminisce and look with fondness at some of those good old days. Jump down to verse 20, and he says, "Indeed, there is not a righteous man on earth who continually does good, and who never sins." And this is a reminder of the fallenness of man, that none of us get it right. He goes on to say in verse 21, "Also do not take seriously all the words which are spoken, so that you will not hear your servant cursing you. For you also have realized that you likewise have many times cursed others." Don't take so seriously those bad things that somebody might say about you, because after all, you've said bad things about others. If you haven't said them outright, you've at least thought them. Verse 29, "Behold, I have found only this, that God made men upright, but they have sought out many devices." Our path tends to be a crooked one. Even with the best intentions, and frankly, we don't have the best intentions, we all have a tendency to go astray. We jump down to chapter 8, verse 11, "Because the sentence against an evil deed," in other words, we look at somebody else who's gone astray, and they didn't just go astray. It wasn't just a mistake. This was evil, and because the sentence against an evil deed is not executed quickly, therefore the hearts of the sons of men among them are given fully to do evil. We look at crime, and we have the saying that crime doesn't pay, but crime seems to pay, at least for a time. And we say, what's wrong with that? Verse 12, "Although a sinner does evil 100 times and may lengthen his life," in other words, he gets away with it, "still I know that it will be well for those who fear God, who fear him openly." Even though people seem to get away with it, do good anyway. Verse 13, "But it will not be well for the evil man, and he will not lengthen his days like a shadow, because he does not fear God." Because there is a judge, and at the end of the day, maybe not in this life. You see, Ecclesiastes doesn't tell us about the next life, but there's a hint there that there's more to the story. And so, do well anyway. Verse 14, "There is a futility which is done on the earth. That is, there are righteous men to whom it happens according to the deeds of the wicked. On the other hand, there are evil men to whom it happens according to the deeds of the righteous." And I say that this too is futility. I look at people who do wrong, and it seems to go well for them, at least for a time, and maybe for a long time. And I look at somebody like Job, who was fine and upright and doing that which was right, and the whole world caves in on him. The world just doesn't seem to go the way it ought to go. Verse 15, "So I commended pleasure. For there is nothing good for a man under the sun except to eat and to drink and to be merry." Now remember, the Apostle Paul actually quotes this in 1 Corinthians 15. It says, if there's no resurrection, then you might as well eat, drink, and be merry because this is all there is. The writer of Ecclesiastes says, well, I don't know if this is all there is, because remember, the resurrection, the life after death, hadn't been clearly revealed yet. And so he says, well, you might as well just eat and drink and be merry, and this will stand by him in his toils throughout the days of his life, which God has given him under the sun. In spite of the fact that, yes, there is a life after death, and that's the rest of the story, but we're not looking at that right now because we're in Ecclesiastes. In spite of that, there is a message here for us. The message is, chapter 9, verses 7 and 8, "Go then, eat your bread in happiness, and drink your wine with a cheerful heart, for God has already approved your works. Let your clothes be white all the time, and let not oil be lacking on your head." In other words, do what's right, but also enjoy the journey. Verse 9, he says, "Enjoy life with the woman whom you love all the days of your fleeting life, which he has given you under the sun. For this is your reward in life, and in your toil in which you have labored under the sun. Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might. For there is no activity or planning or knowledge or wisdom in Sheol where you're going." Enjoy life and do that labor to which God called you. I like to say, that thing for which God made you, do that and do it fully. Do it heartily. Do it with all your might. Not that you become a workaholic, but enjoy the journey and enjoy that thing that God set before you. Now, there's an interesting correlation here when we read these verses we've just read, and we compare it to the Gilgamesh epic, which was a lot older than the book of Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes says, go then eat your bread in happiness and drink your wine with a cheerful heart. And notice that eat, and in the Gilgamesh epic, the writer says to Gilgamesh, you Gilgamesh, let your belly be full, sort of like, what you eat. And keep, it doesn't use the word happiness, but keep enjoying yourself day and night. Ecclesiastes calls the reader, let your clothes be white all the time, and let not oil be lacking in your head. And likewise, the Gilgamesh epic says, let your cloth be clean. And notice, let your head be washed. May you be bathed in water. To the Ecclesiastes says, let your clothes be washed, let them be white all the time. Let your head be washed. Let oil not be lacking on your head. So notice the correlation. The references to cloth and clean and white and head. We continue to the next verse, Ecclesiastes 9. It says, enjoy life with the woman whom you love. The Gilgamesh epic says, gaze on the little one who holds your hand. Let a wife enjoy your repeated embrace. And he's given that to you. Now, Gilgamesh epic talks about destiny, but our destiny is that which God has given. And so, could it be that the writer is taking a familiar line from the Gilgamesh epic and he's utilizing it, he's applying it, he's saying, look, there's some truth to that old story, and he's applying it to the situation here. Well, we come to verse 11, and he says, I again saw under the sun that the race is not to the swift, and the battle is not to the warriors, and neither is bread to the wise, nor wealth to the discerning, nor favor to men of ability, for time and chance overtake them all. There's this thing that we call in life, called chance, where things happen, and sometimes they're good things, and sometimes they're bad things, and things happen unexpectedly. And so there's a sense in which we expect, and we're not surprised when the unexpected takes place. And it might be a good unexpected thing, it might be a bad unexpected thing. But eventually life catches up with you. Verse 12, moreover, man does not know his time. Like fish caught in a treacherous net, and birds trapped in a snare, so the sons of men are ensnared at an evil time when it suddenly falls on them. Enjoy today, because you don't know what tomorrow may bring. And it might not be a good thing. So enjoy the today. I told you about that story of my camping trip so many years ago, something like almost 30 years ago, where we were camping, and while we were doing that, I told you one aspect, but another aspect, we pulled up into a campground up in northern South Carolina. Sounds like a funny thing to say like that. And it was sort of raining, and I said, we can just wait and the rain will eventually stop. But Paula and her brother, they were feeling a little bit more adventurous, and they jumped out in the rain, and they began putting the tent up, and I was there in the car with the kids, and I do what a battalion chief does. I leaned out the window and I gave some instructions. And I called out, don't hammer the tent pegs in too deeply, because we're leaving in the morning. And after that, I thought about that. How often in life are our tent pegs hammered in too deeply? Because this life is temporary, and we act as though it is so permanent. And so the warning is, hold things lightly, because you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. And this is not all there is.